What we're going to do tonight is we're going to teach you some things about law enforcement investigations, about criminal investigations. As a matter of fact, we're going to do, this is a book that kind of become the standard for criminal investigations in our state. I'm sure it's probably true all over the country. But I'm going to try to summarize it for all of you and do what I call Death Investigations 101. Okay? We're going to do that together. Because I think it'll help you to turn a corner and apply these same techniques to the existence of God. And I'll show you what I mean. I've kind of done similar presentations like this in a talk I do on the resurrection, but I've modified it. So if you are familiar with my work on the resurrection, you'll recognize a guy in the next picture. Because in order to work a death investigation, you have to work a death scene. So let's get one on the screen. Here's a death scene. Dead guy laying face down in the room. There's a certain skill set you use when working death scenes, because not every death scene is a crime scene. Because there are 4 ways to die, and only one of those is criminal. The other 3 are non-criminal. And I don't really care if somebody dies in a non-criminal way. If I get called out in the middle of the night, the first thing I want to know is there a crime? Because if there's no crime, guess what? I'm going home. If there is a crime, I got to stay all night. So part of the game here is deciding whether or not I actually have a crime. So far, all I have is a dead guy laying face down. That's the only evidence I have in the room. So given this evidence, how do we approach this? Well, we make what I call 2 E lists. The first E list is all the evidence in the room. E for evidence. The second E list is all the explanatory possibilities. How could I possibly explain the evidence in the room? So far, all I have in the room is a dead guy laying face down. But there are 4 possible ways to explain it. Because you can die 4 different ways. Can you guys even think of the 4 ways you could die? What are they? Natural causes. So I could have a natural death, an accidental death. You said a suicide, right? Who said suicide? Or you have a murder. Those are the 4 ways you can die. I'm trying to figure out which of these 4 I have in front of me, given these facts. Which of these 4? Now, right now, can I cross out any of those possibilities, given the evidence I have in the room?
Not really, but suicide is pretty...
What if he intentionally took an overdose of pills because he wanted to kill himself that way? It would look like that. As a matter of fact, I can't cross off anything right now. Because all of these ways, I mean, he could have been strangled. He could have taken an overdose accidentally or purposely. He could have had a heart attack. It would all look like this. So let's change our scenario just slightly and see if it changes the way we consider it. What if we had a dead guy laying face down, but now he's actually in a pool of his own blood? That, I think, would change things slightly. We have an additional piece of evidence. Let's make our 2 E lists again real quickly. E list on this side now includes an additional piece, a pool of blood. Do you think I can now cross off something?
Accidental? Natural death.
I think I can cross off natural because, I mean, you could have a brain aneurysm, fall down, bleed out through your nose, but it wouldn't be centered around your body. It'd be centered around your head. There's no natural place I could bleed out in the middle of my torso. So I can probably cross out. Now, is it possible? Big difference between possible and reasonable. Anything is possible, but I don't think it's reasonable anymore that it's natural. So I'm going to cross it out. Tracking with me so far? Okay. Can I cross off anything else? I'd have to know I have to roll him over. Maybe he fell on something. He could have stabbed himself in the stomach. I don't know. I can't really cross off these yet, given that little bit of evidence I have in the room. So let's add another piece of evidence to this room. What if I have a dead guy laying face down in a pool of his own blood, but now he's got a bullet wound, and there's a gun in the room? Let me give you some more information about that evidence. This bullet wound is an exit wound. Now the evidence is a little bit deeper. We get back to our E lists. I now have a bullet wound and a gun. Can I cross off anything? Could have shot himself by accident, cleaning his gun. Can't cross anything out, can I? Because it could still be a suicide, it could still be a homicide, it could still be an accidental. Let's add to our collection of evidences. What if now I actually have, in addition to all of this, a suicide note? That would change things, don't you think? Let's go back to our list of evidences. And I've got E's on this side, add the suicide note. Now I think I probably could at least cross off reasonably accidental. But can I cross off homicide yet? Somebody could have planted that suicide note, right? Am I right? Let's go back and add one more thing. What if now I have, in addition to this, another piece of evidence. I have several bullet wounds and several casings on the floor. And I have bloody footprints. You can tell it's happened in Southern California. No shoes. Surfer killer. Now, what if I actually also found out that on this piece of paper there were none of his fingerprints, and in fact I have foreign fingerprints on that piece of paper? That gun's not registered to him, registered to somebody else, and I have these all these wounds, entry wounds on his back. Do you see how this would change things? Okay, pretty simple stuff, right? New set of evidences. Given this, I now can cross out suicide. I know I have a homicide. Now, something happened here, and I'm not sure you even noticed it. This process, by the way, is called abductive reasoning, where we compare one E-list to another E-list, and we cross out those things that are least reasonable. That's what we do in every case. Sometimes this is the list of suspects, and we're using the same process. But what we did here is something that's subtle, that you may not have noticed. We played a little game called Inside or Outside the Room. Here's what I mean. Everything in this room, if you consider this room now, and him in the room, we really have all this stuff contained in a little box. And the question we have is, can we account for all the evidence from inside the room or outside the room? Because if I can account for the evidence from inside the room, it's going to be an accidental, a natural, or a suicide. But if I have to go outside the room, it changes it. In other words, if all I had was this evidence that we started with, a suicide note that he wrote started off inside the room, I can account for that from inside the room. And I also happen to have a gun that's registered to him. Well, that's his gun. It started off inside the room. And he only has one bullet wound that he could have inflicted himself by shooting himself in the chest. All of these pieces of evidence now can be accounted for from inside the room. But if it's different, and by the way, if that's the case, you have only these explanations. But if it's slightly different, if in fact there are foreign fingerprints on that note, and his fingerprints aren't on it at all, and in addition to that, I've got a gun that's not registered to him. It's registered to the same person whose fingerprints are on the note. And in addition to that, I've got a bunch of casings that it's hard to shoot yourself repeatedly. Okay? And finally, I have bloody footprints that lead outside. Well, I can only account for this kind of evidence from outside the room. And once you have evidence you can only account for from outside the room, I've got a problem. Would you agree? Now, I've got a homicide. Because I've got evidence of what? Of an intruder. That's what this comes down to now. Anytime I've got evidence from outside the room, I've got to consider the possibility of an intruder. It's very reasonable now. And intruders change everything. As a matter of fact, intruders change death scenes into crime scenes. But even more importantly, intruders turn a sense of curiosity, because you might be curious about how he killed himself, but once you've got an intruder, you better turn your curiosity off. Now you've got to have a sense of urgency, because you've got a very short period of time which to find out who that guy was. That's why the first 48 hours are really critical to us. They are. So once you've got evidence of an intruder, you better get off your butt. It's time to do something. Be urgent, because you've got somebody to catch. Does that make sense? Now I want to take the same approach, this game of inside and outside, and I want to play it not with that box with the dead guy in it. I want to play it with the universe. What if we're looking at the universe and we ask the same question? If we had evidence of what's in the universe, can we account for all of it from inside the box or outside the box? If all the evidence we find in the universe can be accounted for from inside the box, well, then naturalism will be just fine. It can explain everything. But if I've got evidence in this box that I can't explain from inside the room, now I've got evidence of an intruder. And I think there are 8 pieces of evidence we've got to account for inside the box. Number 1, we have a universe that has a beginning. We've got to explain that. We also have a universe that appears to demonstrate properties of fine-tuning. We've got to be able to explain that evidence. We also have one that, in which life originates from non-life. The origin of life is a piece of evidence in this room. We also have the appearance of design in biology. That's a piece of evidence in the room. We also have the existence of consciousness. That's one thing we can be certain of. We know that we're thinking about this right now. We're conscious and thinking about it. Not only that, we have the freedom, the ability to act freely as free agents. This is another piece of evidence inside this box. And 2 more. We have we know there are some transcendent, objective moral truths. And we also are painfully aware of the persistent problem of evil and injustice in our universe. Whatever explanation we use to explain these 8 pieces of evidence, if it can stay inside the box for an explanation, we're good to go. Naturalism will get us there. If we can't, if we have to go outside, it's a little different. So again, what we're doing here is playing the same kind of game. Can we explain this stuff from inside the room, or do we have to go outside the room? Make sense? And in the end, if we discover we have to go outside the room to explain it, what's that going to tell us? It's going to tell us something about a cosmic intruder. That's really the focus of the next book I'm writing, which is called God's Crime Scene.